and she's just an extraordinary educator who's going to talk about William Tyner, who was my dissertation chair, and someone really meaningful to me in my education as well. So if I do from this slide, do you know how? Yep. Okay. There we go. Okay. Gonna turn it over to Lupe.
Thank you. I'm so excited. This is the first time I get to see the book. And I am so thank you so much, Dr. Vaughn, for inviting me to be a part of this. I think I'm a high school teacher, and so you never think as a high school teacher I'm gonna get to contribute to a book. So super excited for that. But also thank you for shaping and challenging my ideas about who are the producers of knowledge, which I think is tremendous to think that we are all producing knowledge. I think it's super cool, given that I had Dr. Watkins, to think that Dr. Watkins was Dr. Vaughn's mentor, and she's mine. And so she introduced me to Dr. Watkins' work. And then in trying to explain to my students what they were seeing in their school, I introduced them to Dr. Watkins' work. And then these students were invited to give a 2-day workshop to future teachers for District 215, where they were able to share Dr. Watkins' work. And that is the stuff that makes a difference for generations. Here you see them meeting Dr. Vaughn at the AERA conference of the last year. And so I think that it's especially appropriate because it's like Dr. Watkins was talking about legacy. And this is the stuff of legacy. I think the thing that impressed me immediately about Dr. Watkins' work was how he pointed out how self-consciously aware these white architects, as he dubs them, were of their role in nation building. And also the power of Black people, as newly emancipated, the power that they would have to shake things up, and that they might reject, this notion of private property and trying to protect the systems that they had built. They understood the role of education and schooling in that they had to accept this racial capitalism as permanent and immutable, and that the schools were the perfect place to do that. And they did that so deliberately, and they were so very aware of that. We see so much of that still today. But that begs the question, right? What of the teachers who want to give those dreams wings, who want to encourage students to imagine what else could be? And so, there has always, structures will support the status quo, but there have always been Black scholars that are resisting this. And this is what I thought was beautiful to me about being introduced to Dr. Watkins' work, and also just studying in general, and sharing this with my students. So my students got to study the work of these scholars, but then you'll see in that picture they're there with Dr. Ladson Billings at AERA, where they read toward a critical race theory of education and studied it and used it in their presentation, and she showed up at their presentation. When they gave this 2-day workshop to the future teachers, they used Precious Knowledge that features Dr. Andrade, and they talked about that, and Dr. Andrade was there at their workshop. Dr. Emden saw them with Ratchetemic, and so much of the things that they tried to resist in their as their scholarship became activism. And then Dr. Gibbons with Fugitive Pedagogy and School Clothes highlights this beautiful story of Susan Paul. And Susan Paul was an educator who was a choir teacher. And rather than teaching her students to sing the songs that had always been sung, right, what she was expected to do, she let her students sing songs about a world where there was no more enslavement during the time of slavery. So she invited them to imagine a world that their parents nor their grandparents had ever known, and to celebrate it with music. And so this very brave and brilliant move makes a difference, reinforced for me that it makes a difference that the scholars that we learn in pre-service teaching education, but then also like as a K-12 teacher, like what are the texts that I should choose to teach these lessons? And so you're like, I have to teach the Odyssey, like that this is part of like what I have to teach, and sort of like, why is Odysseus the hero again? But in looking at that, we can always pair things, and so I pair it with Shadow Shaper, and that helps students interrogate who are the people we call heroes and why. And they have this Afro-Latina young girl as the protagonist, as the hero, and we get to discuss sexism and racism and colorism, proximity to whiteness, gentrification. And my favorite is the role of the academy. There's this super cool character, she's a librarian, and Sierra breaks into the library because there always has to be that like badassness, right, in YA. But there's a librarian who says like, you know, who gets to study and who gets studied and why? Who makes the decisions, you know? And rather than just like pass by that quote, we really dig into that. And so in studying this message of Nydia's, we read Nikki Rosa by Nikki Giovanni, and we read Suspending Damage by Eve Tufts, which is, you know, the Harvard Educational Review. I read for the first time when I was in graduate school. And so a big criticism often of YA is that there's no academic rigor. And that is just absolutely not the case, because you could bring in all sorts of layered text and the higher order thinking that they get from YA. I know my class with Dr. Letcher also, like really helped highlight that you can really, if you get kids engaged, they can really get to that higher order thinking. Another one of my favorites is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Super high interest, right? Kids are super into dystopia right now. But one of my favorite things is the protagonist has a disability. And it's hyper empathy, which is also super interesting to think of as a disability, that she feels the feelings of others. But unlike stories like The Scarlet Ibis or Of Mice and Men, this disability isn't, first of all, viewed as like all she is, but also like she gets to be the leader, like of these people. It's not like from a deficit perspective. And so they used this novel, and they talked about a Black teen girl as a protagonist, and all of their extended responses were aligned with the Black Lives Matter at School principles. They got to study really cool things. So Dr. Muhammad wrote this piece on literary societies, and so we were able to bring that in. The beautiful history of the Maroons that is so scarcely taught. And my favorite was at the end, they had this assignment where they could imagine this better society. So I tell them, imagine, you know, Lauren has got to Acorn, and they have settled here, and generations later, they are successful. There is no more crime, there is no more poverty, there is no more racism, there is no more sexism. What did it take to get from here to there? And I watch these students engage in such deep problem solving that they're able to do from the safety of fiction, the imaginary, but they absolutely take with them into their real life. And that's why we have these white architects trying to limit the Black working class. Because if they know, they will rage. So these students, once they got to practice with fiction, went to address the board about why do we have canine searches? Why are our bathrooms locked? Why do we have a sexist dress code? They engaged in protest theater, where the plays they wrote themselves about carcerality and the schools. And they got to celebrate their scholarship at NCTE and at AERA. They have a chapter like up for publication, and they're gonna be at NCTE and KUFA this year. They are doing all the academic things, but hopefully they are shaping the world as well. And that is exactly why the white architects, of which Watkins speaks, had to put such careful measures in place, because they never wanted this. But the other thing to consider is the time when these white architects were trying to nation build. The nation was in crisis. They had just gotten over the Civil War. They didn't know what to do with all the recently emancipated. And I would say we're in similar-ish situations. We just got over this global pandemic. We had this insurgency in the Capitol. Income disparity is at a record high. And I think that should be challenges to us as educators, that we can be nation builders too. These weren't gods, they were men. And this system doesn't have to remain as it is, and we have the power along with our students as partners to make this change. Thank you.
So we're really excited about the book. Lots of really great voices and lots of really great ways to engage in thinking.